Well, the book of Daniel is a prophetic book, and it's really the Old Testament version of the book of Revelation. It's an overlay of Revelation. So you have a double witness. You have Daniel in the Old Testament, Revelation in the New. And of course, there's a lot of symbolism. But I want to focus the next couple of weeks on the various prophetic things in Daniel that relate to modern day that we're living in. As I've always said, we are in the final stages of this heaven and earth age. And so the age of the fig tree. And so I'm going to pick it up, first of all, with Daniel chapter 1. And just giving you a little context, Daniel was living in the house of Judah in Jerusalem. And when Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, and by the way, Babel means king, he was the king of confusion. He's a type of Satan, right? Nebuchadnezzar is a type of Satan. And so he comes and he takes the house of Judah captive, and he takes them and he moves them to Babylon, which is modern day Iraq and Iran. Of course, we know that they're always in the news, right? Especially Iran lately. And so last week I talked about the wise men, and I said that they come from the book of Daniel. Well, you're going to see here who the wise men are. So it says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasury house of his God. These would be the golden items from the temple, the main temple in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar took all those items and he brought them back to his own treasury. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick understanding, who had the ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language of the literature of the Chaldeans. In other words, he took the best and the brightest from among Jerusalem, and he brought them to Babylon to be part of his government. And the king appointed for him a daily provision of the king's delicacies. And they trained them 3 years, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah, here's who he took, and this is what Daniel focuses on. He took Daniel, he took Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, you might better know these people as who? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He switched their names from their Jewish names to these Gentile names. But their real names, maybe you didn't know this, but their real name was Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And to them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name of Belshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. And so there you see that you have these characters of the book of Daniel, but it wasn't just them, it was many, many of the best of the best that Jerusalem had to offer. And Nebuchadnezzar took them and he wanted to train them up and put them in his government. Mainly because in the back of his mind, he knew what? that God was with them. That God was with them. And so then we go over to verse 17 in chapter 1, and it says, "As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." And that's going to be important. You know, God interprets dreams many times in the Bible, in the Old Testament, especially like Joseph. Remember Joseph? He interpreted the dreams about his brothers bowing down. That's the reason they got jealous. 3-minute pit. But God gives the interpretation of the dreams. And then it says, "Now at the end of days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the astrologers who were in his realm." Well, of course, because all wisdom comes from God, not from magicians, not from astrologers. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. That would be Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, who would allow the Israelites to go back to rebuild the temple. So Daniel was with those 70 years that they were in captivity. Daniel was there, high up, second to the king in the government. Well, that causes some problems, because you know what happens. What happens when you're in a position of authority? People have got their knives out, right? And, you know, I've experienced that most of my life. You have a position of authority, and people are going to try and cut you down. And that's just the way it is. All right. So now we're going to go into chapter 2. Now, this is where Daniel interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, his first dream, and it's of a statue. And he interprets this, and Nebuchadnezzar's so impressed that he makes Daniel second in command. It says, "Now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. And then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. And so they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, 'I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream.' And the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic." See, they spoke Aramaic. "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation." You see, Nebuchadnezzar had a bunch of yes men around him. "You tell me the dream, and I'll tell you what it means." Well, Nebuchadnezzar was a little smarter than that. The king answered and said, "My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut to pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and a great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream." In other words, he wasn't going to tell them the dream. They had to tell him what he was dreaming. And they said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation thereof." But the king said, "I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you, that you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words to me. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." Well, what do you think the magicians and what do you think they thought about that? They said, "There's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever given such a magician or an astrologer or a Chaldean such a thing. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, small g, who are dwelling. It is not for the flesh. For this reason the king was angry and furious, and he gave the command to destroy, now listen, all of the wise men of Babylon. And so the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them also. And so you see, here we have the wise men. Just as I spoke last week, remember the wise men came from the east, which was Babylon. They were the wise men. And with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men, and he said, "Why is the decree from the king so urgent?" So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. And Daniel went into his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they might seek mercies from God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision, and Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So what do you think happened? Daniel went to the captain of the guards, and they had been appointed to destroy the wise men. And he said, "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I'll tell the king the interpretation." And Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, and said, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known the thing of your interpretation." And the king answered and said to Daniel, who they had named Belshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream and the interpretation thereof?" And Daniel answered in the presence of the king. He said, "The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men and the astrologers and the magicians and the soothsayers cannot declare them to the king, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets." So friends, let me just tell you, these people today in our world that follow after every other religion, every other god, every other type of thing, they can't reveal the secrets. They don't know the secrets. Only God can reveal the secrets, because He knows what? The secrets of your heart. He knows what you think. And so, He knows whether you love Him or you don't. And only God can reveal the secrets of the heart. And again, I've always used this analogy where I can stand at the back of the church and shake your hand on the way out. Well, I just loved your sermon, preacher. You did good sermon this morning. And then they can go out in the parking lot in their car with their wife and say, "That was the worst sermon I've ever heard." So, I don't know your heart. Only God knows your heart. He can reveal the secrets. That's the reason He's the judge. You can't fool God. He knows what you're thinking. And so He made known the secrets of Nebuchadnezzar. And now listen, friends, this is what it says. "And He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days." That's the end times, friends. That's the time you're living in. And so this is all for your benefit. It's an example so that you could know what's coming. And He said, "Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these." Now, I'm running out of time. So I don't want to spend a lot of time, but he sees this vision of a statue. And I'm going to just really briefly run through it. He says, "You, O king, were watching, and behold a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its perfectly and partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut without hands, the stone, Jesus the stone, cut without hands. In other words, it was a heavenly stone, which struck the image, the statue, on its feet of iron and clay, and it broke them in pieces. And the iron and the clay, the bronze and the silver and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." We're talking, of course, the rock of Jesus Christ. This is the dream. And now we will tell you the interpretation thereof. Okay, listen. "You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom." This would be the Babylonian kingdom, "of great strength. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler all of them. You are the head of gold." In other words, God made Nebuchadnezzar. He gave him the power. You might say, well, but he was a bad dude. He had a bad... But you see, God uses bad people and bad things to bring about his plan. There's always a negative to a positive, right? And so we look at the world today. You have, and this is where Iran is. This is where this happened. So you need to think about what's going on in the Middle East, because it has to do with the end of times. And I don't know what's going to happen in Iran, but I keep my eyes peeled. Then it says, "After you, Nebuchadnezzar, shall arise another kingdom, a third kingdom, bronze, which shall rule over all the earth, and a fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. And whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with the clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And as you saw them mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the..." Now listen, friends. Don't read over this. "As you saw the iron mixed with the clay, they will mingle with the seed of men. But they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay." We're talking here about the end times when Satan comes with his fallen angels and sets up those 7 kingdoms with 10 horns and 10 crowns. "And then in the days of the kings of God, the heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and a kingdom which shall never be left to other people. And it shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure." And the whole point of this is that Daniel was telling the prophecy of what was going to happen from Nebuchadnezzar's time all the way to Christ's return. It's kingdom after kingdom after kingdom. And we've seen that in the Middle East, in Iran and Iraq. And now we've come to the feet of clay and iron. And when Satan returns, as it's written in Revelation. He's going to set up this 10-toed kingdom. And the fallen angels are going to mix again. Remember what Jesus said when he talks about his return? He says, it will be like it was in the days of Noah. They'll be eating and drinking and taking in marriage. Marriage of who? Did you go back to Genesis chapter 6? They were taking marriage, the daughters of Adam were taking marriage with the fallen angels. And they were mixing, and they made these offspring, the Nephilim. And he says it's going to be just like that, and that's the 10 toes. I'm going to do the next sermon and the next sermon, and I'm going to tie all of this together. This first is so that you know that there are kingdoms that come from now until the end. And we're going to see in Revelation that Christ returns and he sets up his millennial kingdom ultimately. And so the point is that you need to keep your eyes, as I've said, on the Middle East, always. Because why? The people that are in charge over there are enemies of God. And whatever you think of Trump, again, God uses people to bring about his prophecy. And there's a lot of prophecy to be had. And I think we need to focus on that and be reminded that we're not just walking around in a fog, go to work, make our paycheck, and go home and watch TV. And there's a bigger picture, friends. And as a Christian, you need to know what it says in the Bible about what's coming so that you're not taken off guard. And so that's the reason I'm trying to focus these next few weeks on the prophecy of Daniel. Again, an overlay of Revelation. And I hope it will be helpful to you. It's not one of those, a lot of times I try and preach sermons on your feelings and your emotions, but this is about your knowledge. You have to have knowledge. Regardless whether you're having a bad day or you're feeling down there's a bigger picture, friends. And we need to keep that in the back of our mind as we go through life. We now receive the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. May he remain and abide with each and every one of you. May he make his face shine upon you. And may you go forth from this place to love and to serve the living God. And all God's children say, Amen. Amen.